By now, you've likely heard the familiar timeline of Genghis Khan's wife's kidnapping and Jochi's questioned paternity. Here, we'll uncover why these rumors persisted, how they shaped Mongol power dynamics, and what the sources might be hiding. By the end of this segment, my goal is to convince you that the mystery isn't just Jochi's parentage, but also whether there's any reason to doubt Jochi's paternity at all. Jochi was officially the eldest son of Genghis Khan and his principal wife, Borta, but uncertainties about whether Genghis Khan was indeed Jochi's biological father began immediately. This debate arises from the dramatic kidnapping of Borta by the Merkit tribe, which took place not long after her marriage to Temujin. Temujin, who would later assume the title Genghis Khan, was born into the Borjigin clan of the Mongols in the 12th century. His childhood was marked by hardship, including the slaying of his father and the dissolution of his family's social standing. Despite these struggles, Temujin began consolidating power among various Mongol and Turkic tribes. During this rise, he formed key alliances, one of the most important being his marriage to Borta, who came from the Ongirat tribe. Traditional Mongol culture placed great emphasis on marital alliances, so this connection to the Ongirat provided Temujin with a valuable political and social bond. Sometime in the 1180s, when Temujin's power was still fragile, the Merkit tribe orchestrated a raid on his camp. This raid was motivated by a combination of revenge and pure opportunism. The Merkit had a long-standing feud with Temujin's family, partly because Temujin's father had abducted a Merkit woman years earlier. Accounts in the secret history of the Mongols recount that Borta was taken and held for a period that could have ranged from several months to perhaps as long as a year. This abduction created profound emotional and political turmoil for Temujin. Not only did he lose his primary wife, but he also lost a critical alliance partner. The event galvanized him to form a coalition with his friends and allies, notably Togrul Khan and his childhood friend and sworn brother Jamuka, in order to mount a rescue mission. The successful rescue occurred after the Allied forces defeated the Merkits. Borta was eventually liberated, but the timeline of her captivity cast a shadow of doubt over her pregnancy. She was soon found to be expecting a child who would come to be known as Jochi. Because Borta's captivity overlapped with the period of her conception, many within the Mongol tribes questioned whether Temujin was Jochi's biological father. Whispers persisted that the Merkit kidnapper could have fathered the child. Despite this rumor, Temujin recognized Jochi as his legitimate first son. Notably, it's often presented as fact that the name Jochi best translates to guest, suggesting that this naming was an intentional nod to him being another man's child. What generally isn't told is that Jochi was a very common Mongol name, and there are no negative connotations with it. The meaning of guest in this context of the name is generally interpreted to mean the child is a sort of gift from the divine, a guest from the spiritual realm given to the mortal realm. Another fact in favor of this being a positive name rather than an aspersion about Jochi's paternity is that in steppe culture, treating guests with extreme hospitality was the societal norm. Jochi's name thus implies something of him being a divine honored guest, rather than a suspicious stranger, as many tellings of this narrative strongly imply. Publicly, Genghis Khan never disowned Jochi or treated him as anything other than a legitimate heir. However, the suspicions simmered beneath the surface, affecting Jochi's standing among his siblings and even influencing Mongol power dynamics in later years. In Mongol society, legitimacy was of paramount importance, especially for heirs. The persistent doubt cast on Jochi's lineage placed him at a disadvantage compared to his primary brothers like Chagatai and Ogadei, whose parentage was never called into question. This uncertainty would foreshadow rifts within the family, particularly once Genghis Khan began to expand his empire and looked for clear lines of succession. Although Genghis Khan never openly condemned Jochi, his brothers often expressed skepticism about Jochi's paternity, fueling tensions that would color the Mongol Empire's leadership debates. Regardless of lingering doubts, Jochi rose to prominence under Genghis Khan's leadership. Alongside his brothers, Jochi played a major role in the early Mongol campaigns, assisting in the subjugation of the steppes and the defeat of rival tribes. His abilities as a military leader earned him a significant amount of respect. By 1206, when Temujin was proclaimed Genghis Khan, universal ruler of the Mongols, Jochi had already proven himself as an extremely capable commander. His father recognized his contributions by granting him a large territorial expanse in the western regions of the expanding empire. Jochi governed vast lands, stretching from the Irtysh River to the Ural Mountains and beyond. This vast domain put him in charge of subduing and administering new conquests, and also provided significant steppe land for growing Mongol and Turkic tribes to expand into. During the campaign against the Khwarazmian Empire, Jochi fell out of favor with his father, according to traditional accounts. And it's important to remember here that sources vary, and all of these sources we have are from the period after Ogedei became the Great Khan. Although the sources differ on the specifics, one of the most frequently cited slights attributed to Jochi involved disobedience to Genghis Khan, or being too lenient during sieges. There's a particular story tied to the siege of Urgench, one of the most challenging battles against the Khwarazmian Empire. According to some chronicles, Genghis Khan ordered the systematic pillage of the city, along with specific instructions for dealing with prisoners and distributing captured wealth. It's said that Jochi either hesitated or refused to follow these orders to the letter, possibly showing leniency to certain inhabitants or retaining spoils for his own retinue. Others have speculated that he was lenient towards the inhabitants and the city itself because he expected that the city would form part of his territory. The reasons behind Jochi's alleged disobedience remain speculative, if any such disobedience did even occur. The tension that arose from Jochi's supposed defiance had long-lasting impacts. Genghis Khan valued loyalty above almost everything else, and the notion that his firstborn son, even one whose paternity was questioned, might be willfully ignoring orders, was unacceptable. According to some interpretations of the secret history of the Mongols, Genghis Khan's anger was severe enough that he considered taking punitive action against him. The father-son relationship deteriorated, leading Jochi to isolate himself in his territories in the west and focus on westward expansion. He became estranged from his father and from his family during this period, and his territory quickly became one of the most autonomous regions of the empire. Jochi fell ill and died, likely in 1225, but perhaps as late as 1227, before he could reconcile with the Great Khan or his brothers. Although the exact cause of his death is unknown, some speculate it was due to natural illness, while others suggest more sinister circumstances. Importantly, his death occurred before his father's, meaning that Jochi never ascended to a position of supreme leadership over the entire empire. Some historians maintain that if Jochi had outlived Genghis Khan, the question of succession might have sparked even more serious conflicts within the Mongol royal family. This has led to substantial speculation that agents of either Genghis Khan or one of his brothers may have been responsible for his death. Some historians suggest the controversy surrounding Jochi's paternity may have been fabricated or at least exaggerated by later Mongol rulers. According to this line of thought, they wanted to undermine Jochi's line and bolster their own claims to power. Jochi was, after all, the first son of Genghis Khan's primary wife, which gives him an extremely high degree of legitimacy based on that fact alone. It's important to remember that Jochi's descendants formed the vast and powerful Golden Horde, which ruled over much of western Eurasia. While this territory was sparsely populated, the Golden Horde produced vast quantities of traditional steppe warriors. This is especially true in comparison to other territories where the Mongols adopted settled lifestyles and quickly assimilated to local cultures and beliefs. Yet despite maintaining Mongol traditions and having powerful armies, Jochi's descendants were effectively treated as an illegitimate branch of the family. In a fiercely competitive environment where legitimacy was crucial, casting doubt on Jochi's true father could effectively remove him or his descendants from contention. For subsequent Khans, reinforcing the notion that Genghis Khan's favored successors were the only true blood heirs served to solidify their authority. By playing up Jochi's questionable parentage, they effectively discredited any rivals tied to his lineage. At the same time, the scant nature of primary sources regarding Borda's kidnapping leaves ample room for speculation. The secret history of the Mongols and various later chronicles offer only limited details, often written long after the events they describe. This lack of contemporaneous evidence makes it difficult to discern whether the rumors about Jochi's paternity arose organically or were part of a deliberate political strategy. As such, the historical record contains gaps and biases that modern scholars must navigate. In the absence of definitive proof, it remains entirely plausible that later Mongol rulers deliberately fueled, or even invented, this scandal to reshape perceptions of the royal line. Jochi's paternity mystery therefore could have been one of the greatest historical coups of all time. His lineage, that of the eldest son, could have been effectively completely disinherited from the line of succession of the primary title of the Mongol Empire. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick shout out to my patrons and YouTube members, and a reminder to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. The Otrar Catastrophe was a pivotal moment in early 13th century history that set the stage for the Mongol invasions of Central Asia. Why this incident, which completely changed the face of world history, occurred remains a complete mystery with numerous competing theories. Located along the Silk Road in what is now southeastern Kazakhstan, Otrar was a bustling city under the rule of the Khwarazmian Empire. In 1218, a violent encounter involving a Mongol trade caravan and Otrar's governor sparked a fierce response from Genghis Khan. This catastrophic chain of events led to the destruction of Otrar and the downfall of the Khwarazmian Empire. By the early 13th century, the Khwarazmian Empire, ruled by Muhammad II, was one of the most powerful states in the Islamic world. It stretched from the borders of the Caspian Sea to parts of modern-day Iran and Central Asia. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan had rapidly unified the Mongol tribes and was expanding his realm across the Eurasian steppe. Although the Khwarazmian Empire and the Mongols had previously maintained an uneasy trade relationship, tensions rose when a Mongol trade caravan was sent to Otrar in 1218. That caravan, carrying valuable goods, was allegedly mistaken for a group of spies, or so Otrar's governor, Inalchuk, claimed. It's important to note that the Khwarazmian Empire's economy heavily relied on maintaining trade routes. The empire controlled prosperous cities like Otrar, Samarkand, and Bukhara. Genghis Khan recognized the value of trade and saw the exchange of goods and ideas as a cornerstone of his empire-building strategy. The violent spark that ignited the Otrar catastrophe was Governor Inalchuk's decision to seize the Mongol trade caravan. Historical accounts vary slightly, but all agree that Inalchuk ordered the merchants to be arrested and had their goods confiscated. Some sources suggest he was simply greedy and saw an opportunity to enrich himself with the caravan's treasure. Another theory holds that he genuinely believed the travelers were spies collecting intelligence for a future Mongol attack. The brutality of the situation only escalated when most of the merchants were eliminated, further inflaming Mongol outrage. When word reached Genghis Khan, He sent a diplomatic envoy demanding that Inalchuq be punished and that restitution be paid for the stolen goods. However, the Shah refused these demands, and according to some accounts, he had the Mongol envoys slain. In other accounts, he had some of the envoys tortured and publicly humiliated before sending them back. Historians have advanced several theories to explain why Otrar's governor dared to antagonize one of the most formidable armies of the era and in world history. First, some believe that Inalchuq acted out of simple greed. The caravan, loaded with valuable merchandise, was simply too tempting, and he felt confident in his defenses against a somewhat distant nomadic power. After all, Otrar was strategically located and well fortified, which might have led Inalchuq to underestimate the Mongols' capabilities, especially in sieges. And regarding that last point, it's very true that historically nomadic people were simply completely unable to deal with heavily fortified cities. What the governor presumably didn't know is that the Mongols had been pressing into service every Chinese siege engineer they could very literally get their hands on. Another theory is that the governor received prior instructions or tacit approval from the Shah himself. The Shah might have grown suspicious of the Mongols' increasing influence and expansionist ambitions. He may have instructed his local governors to take an aggressive stance with any Mongol mission. In that context, Otrar's governor would have been merely following orders. However, this notion is disputed by those who argue the Shah had already been profiting from trade with the Mongols and wouldn't have willingly cut off a lucrative commerce route. Some scholars posit that a simple misunderstanding or miscommunication occurred, with the governor genuinely convinced that the caravan was a reconnaissance mission. In warfare, intelligence gathering is crucial, and it's not far-fetched to imagine Otrar's governor acting out of caution. Another theory suggests that Inalchuq's advisors had been infiltrated by Mongol agents or assets. Under this theory, he was encouraged to take the goods by people acting under Mongol orders in an attempt to build a justification of war against the Shah. Genghis Khan, incensed by the mistreatment of his merchants and envoys, mustered a large army and launched a full-scale invasion of the Khwarazmian Empire in 1219. Otrar was one of his first targets, both symbolically and strategically, and his sons Chagatai and Ogadai personally led the efforts. The siege of Otrar began later that year and lasted for about 5 months. The city's defenses were formidable, but the Mongols' use of Chinese siege engineers and gunpowder technology gradually would ultimately prevail. Eventually, a section of the city's walls were breached, and Mongol troops streamed in. Inalchuq and his forces continued to resist, retreating to the inner citadel. Some primary sources suggest that Genghis Khan ordered a particularly brutal fate for Inalchuq, possibly by pouring molten silver into his eyes and mouth. The fall of Otrar was catastrophic for the Khwarazmian Empire. The city was sacked, its population decimated, and its strategic importance lost. This victory opened the gateway for the Mongols to sweep through other major cities like Bukhara and Samarkand, eventually bringing all of Central Asia under their rule. The horrors that befell Otrar served as a grim warning to other cities, many of which surrendered more quickly to the Mongols rather than risk total destruction. In historical hindsight, it's clear that Otrar's governor and the Khwarazmian Shah disastrously misjudged the Mongol threat. Had the caravan been treated differently, it's possible that the Khwarazmian Empire might have maintained a prosperous relationship with the Mongols for a time. That said, given that the Mongol Empire had already begun to metastasize, this would likely have just been delaying the inevitable. The true reason behind Inalchuq's ill-fated decision will likely remain one of history's unsolved mysteries, as well as one of the worst decisions a human has ever made. The final resting place of Genghis Khan, one of the most formidable leaders in world history, has remained a mystery for almost a millennium. While he died in 1227, the exact location of his burial site is still unknown. This enduring enigma has given rise to countless expeditions, theories, and even modern technological investigations, all aimed at uncovering the truth about where the founder of the Mongol Empire lies. Early written sources, changing archaeological methodologies, and the historical context surrounding the secrecy of his burial all contribute to our ongoing fascination with this elusive grave. Early historical accounts provide only scant clues. Contemporary Mongol and Chinese chronicles from the 13th century are frustratingly vague, which may have been intentional. According to The Secret History of the Mongols, a 13th century Mongolian chronicle, he died during a campaign against the Western Shah dynasty and was transported back to Mongolia for burial. However, the text doesn't specify the grave's exact site. Rashid al-Din, a Persian historian writing in the early 14th century, recorded that Genghis Khan's remains were taken to the Khenti Mountains, an area traditionally significant to Mongols. However, he was clear that the Great Khan hadn't been buried in that area, but rather his body was subsequently transferred somewhere else which he was unaware of. Over time, folklore and oral traditions further complicated the narrative. A popular legend claimed that those involved in the funeral procession killed anyone who witnessed it, ensuring eternal secrecy outside of the highest elites of the Mongol Empire. Another persistent story alleges that horses trampled the burial ground flat, while a river was diverted over the grave to mask it forever. Such accounts, while dramatic, are nearly impossible to either confirm or deny. However, they illustrate the lengths to which the Mongols might have gone to preserve the sanctity and secrecy of their greatest leader's final resting place. In the modern era, the search for Genghis Khan's grave has taken on new forms. Archaeologists, historians, and amateur enthusiasts have employed advanced technology, including satellite imagery, remote sensing, and ground-penetrating radar, in their attempts to locate the tomb. In 2001, a Japanese-Mongolian joint expedition began employing modern archaeological methods and non-invasive scanning techniques in the Khenti province, where many believe Genghis Khan was buried. This effort, though it showed initial promise, ended up turning up no results whatsoever. Another high-profile effort was launched by Dr. Albert Yumin Lin of the University of California, San Diego, who led the Valley of the Khans project. His team used satellite imagery and crowdsourced analysis to identify possible archaeological features in the Khenti region. Although the project generated significant excitement, it ultimately did not confirm the location of Genghis Khan's grave. Notably, these projects have had limited support from the Mongolian government, which has often placed fairly significant restrictions on any sort of excavations or more disruptive searches. The reluctance to disturb possible burial sites is partly driven by cultural and spiritual respect. Genghis Khan holds an almost sacred status in Mongolia's national identity. Any disturbance of his final resting place, should it be found, is likely not something that the government will take lightly. Also, it's important to remember that traditional Mongolian beliefs consider certain areas of the Khenti Mountains holy, and many of the locals prefer leaving these sites undisturbed. In my research, I found an interesting quote in a National Geographic article from Dr. Lin, who I briefly mentioned earlier. The exact quote is, "He's the greatest shaman who ever lived, and they don't want his spirit disturbed." And when you're talking about a guy so destructive he reduced the ecological footprint of humanity for hundreds of years, well, you may not want to disturb his spirit either.